conversations with retailers, I've learned that both traditional sort of on-premise foot traffic as well as overall beer consumption is trending downward at the moment on-premise. And many consumers are substituting what would ordinarily be a bar visit with a taproom visit. Brewers Association chief economist Bart Watson said that in 2016, almost 10% of all sales from small and independent brewers occurred at the brewery. And that's up from 7% the year before. And by his estimates, about 2.3 million barrels of beer being sold through breweries now. So that is significant, and it's something that we're going to talk about with retailers up here today. Enough data. Let's introduce our guest. Gregory Howard is the Director of Beverage Strategy for Yard House Restaurants. He currently oversees more than $36 million worth of beverage purchases for nearly 70 locations and a combined 9,100 tap handles across 24 states. Marc Sawyer is the Director of Brewery and Distributor Relations for World of Beer. And World of Beer has 70 locations in the US and China, and he developed World of Beer's category management strategy and works with managers across the country to implement and customize beer offerings relative to their local markets. And last but certainly not least is Jonny Stringer, the manager of beer operations for Craftworks restaurants. He focuses on their Old Chicago business. There's 108 Old Chicago locations in 24 states. And in this role, he executes and develops Old Chicago's beer strategy, oversees about 4,000 draft lines, and manages more than 85 different versions of their beer list. So please welcome to the stage Greg, Marc, and Jonny. Come on up. So I'll kick things off by having each of you guys give us sort of a quick snapshot of your businesses. I gave a very high-level view of what you guys do every day and kind of where you guys are at. But can you share any sort of top-line numbers in terms of popular beer styles that you're seeing in your establishments, your sort of typical sales mix by alcohol segment, any high-level trends that you're noticing in terms of consumer purchasing behavior? I'll start with you.
Sure. So right now we're around, like you said, about 68 buildings and 9,000 tap handles. We manage, I think last year we purchased about 1,800 SKUs, so all draft, no package for the most part, just a couple little non-alcoholic packages. So most of our business is obviously in the draft segment. We've been in the business now since 1996, so we've seen a lot of trends come and go. We've seen the sessionability trend that we were talking about earlier kind of come and go on an on-premise. Didn't really hit for any of us. But I don't think there's a lot of going to be a lot of surprise. We're seeing IPAs still dominate the marketplace. Fruit-based IPAs are still trending extraordinarily well. We're starting to see unfiltered New England-style IPAs do well. Fruit beers, sours still do extraordinarily well. Mexican imports, I don't know if anybody knows out there, but those are doing really well. So if you can make a Mexican import, go ahead and do it now. So those are the main categories for us that are doing well. We see approximately somewhere between 35 and 40% of our total volume coming from alcoholic beverage, and of that, most of that is beer. So say 55%, give or take, with the next segment coming from spirits. But as the trends have been going, beer has been slowing down and spirits have been rising, and wine's just about flat.
Sure. So. Marc, how about for you guys?
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with World of Beer, a typical World of Beer tavern will have 50 draft handles and about 500 packaged bottle and cans in our coolers. And World of Beer has been a concept that's kind of gone under some transition over the past few years. We recently, we started in 2007 just strictly as a craft beer bar. And over the past couple of years, we've had the addition of food and wine and spirits to the concept. So I think with that evolution has come an evolution of our consumers. Of the occasions in which they're using us, and I think that's certainly shifted the types of beers that they're drinking. It's certainly surprising to see the sessionability term and the lack of recognition, because they're certainly drinking that way in our taverns, as Greg mentioned. Sessionable styles, pale lagers, pilsners, golden ales, Belgian wits are very much our top driving brands and styles. So yeah.
Jonny, how about for the Old Chicago establishments?
Old Chicago, it's pretty similar to what both these gentlemen mentioned. Old Chicago's actually been around for 40 years, which is a long time for us. And you know, I think something I'd like to mention is that we've had 30 tap handles for 30 years in our restaurants. So I used to be able to come into Old Chicago and like, holy cow, look at all the beer that you guys have. But you know, it's changed now. You can throw a stone and hit another tap room with 50 handles. We are about similar 38% beverage, so 60-40 basically, and 85% of that beverage is beer. Similar trends, IPAs, fruit beers, fruited IPAs, very, very popular for us. So.
Nice. Yeah, you talked about being in the space for a long time and being a destination for beer drinkers to be able to try a wide variety of products, having 30 taps, and clearly that you know, that sort of business model or that approach has really grown, and those concepts are everywhere now. There are a lot of different places where you can find 30, 40, 50 different taps. And you know, I think it's very obvious that competition within on-premise is stiff. What are some of the biggest challenges that you guys are facing right now? And I know that, you know, when we spoke last month, some of the things that you pointed out were foot traffic and consumers wanting to drink at home. You know, a lot more brands fighting for sort of a shrinking pie. You know, beer incidents on receipts going down. So, what are some of the biggest challenges within that you guys face as operators? And I'll start with Greg.
Yeah, I was actually talking to the Nielsen team earlier about some of this, but you know, if you go back 10 years on our menus, we had, you know, some Belgian strong ales that were strong that were served in goblets, but we didn't have anything that was served in a pint-only status because the alcohol contents just weren't that high. You know, most of the beers we had on our menu were pale ales, pilsners, amber lagers, things like that. But if you look at our menus today, in a normal building with 130 taps, 30 of those brands can't be served in a half yard or in anything larger than a 16-ounce pint because they're just too strong. And I think that's translated into seeing the lower receipts, you know, or lower beer incidents on receipts because you can't drink, you know, 4 or 5 Stone IPAs, you know, if you're sitting down in an on-premise establishment. It's not really possible to do that where you could do that with some of, you know, the light lagers and lower ABV beers that we were seeing before. So certainly that's a challenge. You know, the beer is better now. I mean, there's so much more selection, and so we are in this sort of utopia world of we can choose whatever we want, and it's fun to do that, but it's also difficult because there's a lot of local, there's a lot of great local, there's a lot of average local too, though, that we have to sift through, and our jobs have become a lot more difficult because of that, but you know, those are a couple of the challenges I think are pressing, and the out-of-stock issues are obviously huge, but I'll let maybe somebody else talk about that.
Well, yeah, I'll touch on, you know, just and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more later, but the proliferation of tap rooms and, you know, independent restaurants and bars is certainly not lost on us. But I think it's, you know, it forces us to elevate our game in a way. You know, I think what we've always prided ourselves on is, you know, filling our draft handles with the absolute best beer that we can possibly find. And I think we have to maintain that level of quality on our draft lines and our bottle coolers that you see the success that some of those tap rooms and local independent restaurants are doing. They focus on that quality. And we have to continue to do that as well to drive that traffic back into our taverns. And certainly to continue to drive an engaging environment as well. I think you see some brands that are being very successful and they have a very engaging social environment that we're trying to create as well.
How much harder is it to do that now that there are so many brands out there walking through your doors and pitching you guys every day?
I'd say it's never been harder than today. You know, we have a lot of local autonomy when it comes to our taverns and product managers on site that are ultimately making the day-to-day decisions on a lot of the beers that they're bringing in. So for us, it's about getting back into the taverns and training those folks, those local beer buyers, on how to properly critique a beer that they're going to come bring in. You know, working with the staff members, working with our customers to understand what a quality beer is and what's ultimately going to sell in our taverns.
Yeah. Jonny, what's been the biggest challenge at Old Chicago?
Well, I can't stress enough the quality and, you know, the quality aspect of things is that, you know, you have to have a great training program now because there is a lot of mediocre local beer out there. You know, that is not up to par with everything else. But, you know, the challenge is that local beer is selling really well. You know, that local's what's pulling from this regional and national craft right now. And so I think, you know, can't stress enough about quality of your beer, having a lab, having the the tools to, and then the tools to be able to train staffs at 100+ restaurants.
So you guys really lean on the breweries themselves to help you with that education process then?
Well, I mean, we have a fantastic training program that we built that every single server and bartender has to go through, and manager in our restaurants. But I mean, yes, you do have to lean on the breweries, because oftentimes coming from a brewer or a brewery, that training's a lot more valuable to your staff, or taken better in.
Yeah. So we talked about, just sort of the notion that identifying quality brands is getting a little bit more difficult now, trying to get consumers to come back to your establishments and interact with you guys, drink more beer there. Those are sort of the two key areas that you guys are looking at as, big things that you need to address. So how are you addressing those challenges? How are you convincing consumers to stay and have a couple more pints? How are you convincing the consumers to walk through your doors in general and let them know that, hey, we have some really quality beers that you can drink here?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily actually more difficult to sort through the brands, which ones are good and which ones are bad. It's just more cumbersome because there are so many. Our team rates approximately 1,000 beers a year that we just do, 5 or 6 beers a day, every day, and we just go right through them. But it's pretty easy to identify which ones are good quality and which ones aren't. I mean, sometimes you can actually just smell them, and right off the bat, and you don't even have to go much further than that. And other ones, but you have to be careful, though, because there are some really small breweries out there that are doing just some tremendously brilliant work. And so, those are those gems that you need to go and find. But in terms of trying to bring people in more often or have them stay a little bit longer, at least for Yard House, it's about having the right brands on tap in every single building, which for us it's a granular process that just takes forever. It's 9,000 tap handles again that you're managing, and we have, just like I think both of you gentlemen, all of our menus are different in every single one of our buildings. So finding out what's selling and what's not selling, and then growing the brands that are selling in building A versus growing the style category in building B, they're two different entities. You have to treat them individually, and that level of granular process just takes a lot of time. But it's worth it, because ultimately you're going to let the guests choose what they want in buildings. If we see low sales, we take a brand off tap. If something does tremendously well, then we'll add another beer either in that style or from that brewery. So in a way, the guests end up choosing what goes on our menus.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think for us, it's about building credibility with our customers, and certainly building credibility with you as the brewers. Starting with you as the brewers, we want to be a retailer that you're proud to, for us to serve your product and to know that we're handling it in an appropriate way and it's getting to the customers at the highest quality possible. That goes into the fact of, again, building credibility with the customers, and the fact that we're serving fresh quality product on a consistent basis. So I think ultimately, if we continue to build that credibility and harp on that quality, we'll continue to gain that traffic.
And we're looking at code dates, and we're looking at product, shipment dates, and we're cleaning our lines on a regular basis the way that they're supposed to be cleaned. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that, to your point, we're treating the beer correctly for what you're producing, and hopefully that, allows you to be proud of the products as you walk into the buildings and taste them.
And I think having, great glassware program, an excellent tap list. If you're a tap room now, that's an expectation. So really, I mean, having a great draft list is very important, but really creating the experience. I think everybody's heard, millennials, you talk about that, is millennials don't want to purchase a product, they want to purchase an experience. And so having the right beers and the right things to create that experience for the guest is probably most important.
Yeah, and what does that experience look like for you guys inside your establishments? I know when we spoke before, you had mentioned programs with breweries to actually create exclusive offerings and really have something unique to kind of drive the customer to you. So what are some of those programs? How can brewers get involved with you guys to actually help your business and help their business ultimately?
Yeah, we've done one-off beers with partners before. We did an anniversary beer with Rogue a couple years ago. We did one with the guys at Green Flash and Alpine Beer Company last year. We have another one we're doing this year for anniversary beer. And those are really, really fun. And again, it adds a level of exclusivity for what we're providing to our guests. And I know that you've done the same thing as well. So, those are fun, and it does allow you to give it that limited edition feel of come in and try this beer in an on-premise setting. So those are important. Really the most important thing as a partner, what we're looking for isn't the limited edition stuff as much as it is great communication, fresh beer, no out-of-stock issues. Those are the most important things for me. The limited edition stuff is really, really fun. It does drive traffic to a certain extent, but you need to create other things in your offering that are going to target the millennial guest who maybe wants to be a little bit more experiential. So we did build your own 4-packs, so you can choose any beers you want, 5 ounces of each one. So we launched that this last year. Those are the kinds of things I think that are going to, allow them to taste through our pretty vast selections of beer. That's what they want to do, is explore the world and the flavors of beer.
Sure. Jonny, you run a little bit harder at that exclusive programming.
Yeah, we have 2 programs that we run. We have our World Beer Tour, and we do these little mini tours within it that are thematic events, essentially around Halloween or the holidays, stuff like that. And we do seek out to find these exclusive beers and these beers that are created for us, so that people, the only place you can come is Old Chicago for that destination beer. So we've worked with Sierra Nevada, Stone. We just did one with Crooked Stave and Melvin. They did a collaboration for us, and amongst others, we did a Rogue one as well. So it's very important to us, and I think that it does drive people into the restaurants.
Yeah. How scalable are those programs?
Well, we've gone from, working with Crooked Stave in Colorado, they made us 50 barrels of a beer, up to a Sierra Nevada that did, 400 barrels up for us. So, we are willing to work with breweries to place that in the right areas and the right restaurants for as big or small batches they want to make us. So.
Marc, how about for World of Beer? Are there any creative ways that you guys are partnering with breweries?
Yeah, I'll say we have attempted the exclusive product before, not to the level of success that I believe we first thought was going to take place when we ideated it. But I think there's elements within the supply chain that make it a bit challenging and ultimately not able for us to meet customer expectations. So while we certainly appreciate the opportunity to do that, I think ultimately what we're looking in terms of collaboration is, not off-the-shelf type programs, but things specifically designed for World of Beer, utilizing assets or, beers that you already have in place. There's a lot of tremendous beer out there that people are, taverns like us and other bars are driving traffic based on the launch of those annual releases, let's say. So it's taking those known commodities, those assets, and delivering a really cool program, event, whatever it may be in our taverns.
How successful are those?
They're very, depends on the brand, depends on the beer, to be honest with you. I think it's, there's a tremendous amount of success to be had as long as it's promoted properly, as long as, both ends of, brewery and our taverns are upholding, what we expect from that event.
Yeah, we hear, on sort of that same thought process, we hear a lot about sort of flagship fatigue, and we write about that. And, we talked with Dan, obviously, this morning about sort of this herd mentality and flavor of the month and just kind of chasing trends. I think that in many ways, both brewers and retailers almost have kind of a responsibility to remain patient and stay focused on building those core brands and those flagship offerings. But, at the end of the day, that's not really something that consumers these days are looking for. They are looking for something new and that experience element of things. So how do you balance those two priorities of, wanting to support some of the core offerings that make these breweries what they are and enable them to create these fun and exciting beers with, hey, we want this exclusive Chalkboard Series beer, or we want to do a special program for this holiday?
Yeah, it's important to support core, right? I don't think any of the brewers in this room want to give us their, limited edition barrel-aged special beers and not have us support the core brand. So, we're all, again, lucky enough to be able to do that pretty successfully because of the depth and breadth of our programs. They're huge. So it's certainly important. I think ideation is equally as important from the brewery side. I think there was a number last year, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but a huge portion of the growth of the new sales were coming out of just pure ideated brands, like just brand new items. So innovations is key, and we want to be a part of those innovative brands and put those on tap as well. Certain core brands, some of them ultimately find the end of their life, and you've got to create something new. And sometimes that limited edition thing that you did is going to be a part of your core brand. So I would say that if breweries aren't creating something, one or two new brands every single year for us to discuss, then the chances of you getting additional sales in the double-digit numbers is exponentially decreased. It's hugely important.
Yeah, we have a pretty broad customer base in terms of their craft beer usage, let's say. I think there's a very vocal yet small group of our customers who are actively looking for that innovation, actively looking for that newest release. But we have a very large segment of our customers who aren't as concerned about that. So where those core brands probably speak more to them. I remember the first time I ever went to a World of Beers as a customer, it's extremely overwhelming. And for us to have an educated staff and to have the types of brands on draft that make customers feel comfortable, and we can get them a beer in their hand a lot quicker than them having to peruse the menu and get samples and try to understand what's kind of happening on our draft list. So I think it's critical to have that balance between those core accessible brands and that constant rotation of new, exclusive, rare, hard to find, whatever it is.
Yeah, this idea of the consumer being overwhelmed with so much choice is something that we hear about both on and off premise. Curious to learn how each of you guys address that, and what you guys are doing to kind of cut through or help the customer cut through, so that they can make a really informed decision about a product, and they aren't sitting there staring at a menu of 130 different beers going, I don't know, just pour me something. So how do you guys kind of deal with that that notion that there is so much choice out there that consumers are just confused? And I'll start with Jonny.
We tap, I'm talking about balance. It is incredibly important to have a balanced core list along with this rotation nation. We tap over 1,000 unique SKUs a month at our restaurant. And anytime that we have one of these beers created for us or anything like that, we are supporting it with a core line. I think it's important to tell that story of this is a beer that made us, and here's this, limited edition exclusive beer. But yeah, I think that's very important, just the balance of things.
Yeah, and how do you guys help consumers through the sort of selection process of beers?
Well, so everything that we do is organized into categories, and I think very similar to what everybody's doing right now is that people drink by hoppy beer, malty beer, all that, and so organized that way. But it's hard. With a lot of these rotating beers that are coming in, you never know kind of what you're going to get. I think that's certainly one of the challenges is breweries these days, really get one shot. Your brand is your brewery, and oftentimes we'll get these limited edition beers in, and they're odd or they're different, and that doesn't necessarily translate into people understanding your brand.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, certainly we have, the draft menu is categorized by, style characteristics, if you will, and it's pretty clearly defined. And so if you're a customer coming in and you like, hop-forward beers, you're going to automatically go to that section and just peruse that list of how many ever beers are in that section. But beyond that, it goes back to having a really well-trained and educated staff. And I think for us to move away from as much rotation to set core brands and styles helps the staff, because if you have a staff member, a server who only works a couple times a week, and they come in their second day of the week and 50% of the handles have rotated, they're not going to be knowledgeable on all those beers. So to have a truly well-educated staff is going to help that customer feel much more comfortable and guide them to something very quickly.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. You're almost sort of limited in what you're able to do from a rotation standpoint because of just the size of your operation and the way that you guys are structured. And so do you think that puts you at an advantage or a disadvantage being sort of the guy in town that has I guess a higher percentage of core brands than maybe the local craft beer bar that's getting all the unique one-off rare stuff?
Well, I think with 50 handles, it's pretty easy. It's if you're telling me that you can't manage both of those in 50 handles, I'd say you're lying to me, because you can absolutely strike that balance where a lot of those local independents aren't going to have 50 handles. They maybe have 15, 20 handles of that local rotating brands. We can still manage that within our 50 set list. So,
yeah. How do you guys work with both local and national brands? I mean, obviously you want to have Sierra Nevadas and the New Belgiums of the world pouring beers at through 130 different taps at Yard House, but how willing are you guys to work with the smallest of the small brands in any given market, and what does that look like for each of you?
We're willing to work with any brewery as long as they're making good beer. We just started working with Verdugo West out of Burbank, and they only came up on our radar because we opened that Burbank building, and they're 0.7 miles away. And as I did a brewery search, as I always do when we open a new location, to find out who's the closest. If you don't at least approach that brewery and ask them if they're interested in possibly a partnership, then it's almost a slap in the face. I mean, you really do have to do your research and your due diligence. So we went there and met Chris, the brewmaster, and he's an extraordinarily talented individual who's making great beer, so we put him on tap. It's not easy to do that. I mean, it does take time and legwork, and if we met and his beers were horrible, then I would be obligated to tell him that we would pass and that the beers weren't where we need them to be. And those are conversations that are difficult, and just by the law of averages, somebody has to be making average beer out there. And so when we pass on something, we try to be as polite as possible and tell them, hey, we're going to have to pass. We just don't feel like it's a good fit for us. And yeah, I think the struggle is sometimes there's so much pride on the brewery side is sometimes they'll just tell us, well, you're wrong. You're wrong. Our beer's really good, and you should have it on tap. And we've won this county fair medal, and it's. We always tell them, if you buy a new piece of equipment or change recipes or come out with new beers and you want us to taste them again, send them. But it's a lot of email communication. And again, I'm very lucky to have a team of 5 highly talented individuals who I get to work with who help sort through that.
Sure. I mean, it's got to be pretty difficult, though, in some cases. You talked about the out-of-stock issues. I got to imagine that kind of rears its head at the smaller level a bit more than maybe the national level.
I don't think it's more on the smaller level, actually. I think it's about equal right now, and that's something that's changed over the last couple of years.
Interesting.
I think some of the large breweries, and obviously we won't name names here, but they'll come out with a brand and they'll have this expectation for it in terms of sales and volume and what it's supposed to do. It misses that expectation either slightly or even significantly, and all of a sudden they're backing out of that. And then the distributor partners don't want to bring it in, and we've put it into 50 buildings, and all of a sudden you can't get it in 20 or 30 of those buildings because the distributor doesn't want to push it. They don't want to sell it because it's not moving, and the supplier doesn't really care about it anyway because it's going away in 3 months, so it doesn't matter. And then we have to reprint those menus. So it's at least I could call Chris and get him to brew a batch of beer at Verdugo West, and he would be able to do that. So it's just a lot of communication again. I don't think it's necessarily less prevalent on the smaller level, though, personally.
No.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty equal across the board. I mean, you'd be amazed how many large breweries out there I've found now that don't even know they've been dropped by a distributor. It's absolutely true. And to find out and be like, can't get your beer in Texas, and get a phone call and say, apparently our distributor dropped us in Texas. So, I mean, I'd actually say more on a national level. I mean, these distributors are picking up so many SKUs now, and it's got to be just impossible to manage. So, I mean, I guarantee if I pick up my phone right now, I've got 10 out-of-stock emails right now. So,
Greg, you talked about working with Verdugo, and I gotta ask, does he have a tap room?
He does.
All right, so he's 0.7 miles away, and he's got a tap room. What's that like? I mean, is there any tension there? I'm sure there are other examples where you guys have Yard House locations and breweries are either building near them or building secondary tap rooms near them, or they have significant pull to their tap room that's already there. So what's that tension like with brewers these days?
It depends on the model. In that particular case, he has a very small tap room. It's connected to his brewery. they don't have food. They actually order, food from a restaurant and they'll deliver it to the brewery. You just like place your order on your phone. It's a completely different setup than what we're doing, and there really is no friction whatsoever there. If you have, 20 tap rooms across the United States, you are a competitor, but ultimately, it depends on even how that's modeled. So what's the difference between a tap room opening up versus another restaurant? It's just another competitor to us. It doesn't really make a difference, I don't think, for me personally. The only difference would come in is if, we're being charged a certain amount for the beer, and so we have to charge a certain amount back to our guests, and you're charging it for $2 or $3 less. I think that is where there's some tension. It just depends on what the model is. So we ask them, because oftentimes brewers are proud, like, hey, we just opened a tap room right across the street from you. And they're really excited to tell us about their new place. And I always ask them, cool, well, we have that brand on tap. What are you charging for it? And as long as it's, it can be less, that's fine. It just can't be, we're charging it for $2 a pint.
Right.
That's not going to work. That's more difficult.
Marc, do you guys have an issue with the proliferation of brewery tap rooms now?
Yeah, I think, as Greg said, it's not as much of a concern until they start to maybe open up multiple locations in a given market, trade market. That one, start to impede on our business, especially if they're starting to do, food or different elements that make us a little bit of a point of differentiation. But I think there's elements of the taproom experience that we're trying to achieve, and it's a matter of working with them to get some of those taproom exclusives in our tavern. Certainly, the environment that these breweries and tap rooms are creating is, again, go back to socially engaging and a welcoming environment. So I think it's something we're going to keep a watchful eye on. I don't think that there's any reason we can't coexist. I think anything that brings awareness to the segment is a benefit. And I think that the relationship that we have to build with these local breweries is a mutually beneficial one. One that we're promoting their brands, and then when their customers in their tap rooms, they're driving business back to our tavern as well.
Yeah, ultimately, we're in partnership with every single brewery that we work with, right? It's not we're the customer and they're the ones selling beer to us. It really is truly a partnership on all sides, and I think we all feel that way. And anything that makes the breweries more successful, and if that includes a tap room, great. I don't think any of us really have a problem with it. We are out for the success of our partners as well.
Absolutely.
It seems like the partnership could easily break down, though, if a tap room opens up next door and starts pulling your customers away, and suddenly you're not able to get as much beer. I mean, you guys must see that in Chicago, right? Or in Colorado.
Yeah, yes and no. We want to work with local breweries. We want to work and have those partnerships, like Greg mentioned. But we also want people to know that beer that's down the street is on tap at Old Chicago too. So it is truly a partnership, and absolutely can coexist and keep selling great beer.
Yeah. I wonder, long term, what impact the amount of brewery tap rooms that we're seeing opening up will have on the the on-premise retail space in general. Have you guys given much thought to, maybe not what's happening right now? It seems like it's okay right now. There's maybe a little bit of tension and maybe it's building, but have you given much thought to, a year, 2, 3 years down the road when, maybe there's 5 million barrels of beer being sold at brewery tap rooms, and maybe you guys are having to close locations or something? Like, at what point does it go from being, a partnership to something where, like, hey, I don't like this anymore, and we're going to push back?
If they replicated our food menu exactly and served it, yes, that would be that would be where I would draw the line right there. But ultimately, my restaurants, Yard House restaurants are different than Old Chicago, or different than World of Beer. And if we were on 3 different corners, that would be a great place to go for beer. So, I don't really think it has. I have no problem with brewery tap rooms. I really don't. If they're selling 5 million barrels a year, then guess what? We need to step up our game, make sure that our education is extraordinarily high, our service is extraordinarily high, our food and beverage programs are extraordinarily high. There's always going to be things that brewery tap rooms are going to be able to do that we're not going to be able to do. We're not going to have, a cornhole game in the backyard barbecue pit. We're not going to do that. But there's going to be things that Yard House can do that, a brewery tap room can't. So I really don't view it as anything different than, another restaurant. as long as that's the way they're treating it. Again, not $2 pints when they're charging me $225 a keg.
Sure. Marc?
I think it just requires us to focus on our execution better. I think it's easy for us to blame outside forces on potential, not being successful in our business. But if we're executing our concept, our brand, the way we set out and designed to do it, that's how we win traffic. And we work with those breweries to help drive that traffic. So I think ultimately for us, it comes down to just executing our brand at a really high level to do so.
I agree 100%. I mean, it's people are going to these tap rooms because that's the story behind the beer. That's the experience for them. And so we have to create an experience too in our restaurants that's worthwhile to have people come in.
Do you guys go to brewery tap rooms?
Absolutely.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
If we felt that strongly, none of us would go.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you got to go there to solicit them for to get their beers on tap at your establishments, right?
We don't do a lot of the chasing usually. Usually breweries end up chasing
You
us.
just told me you looked up Verdugo West when you got to town.
Yeah, actually, that was a distributor partner who actually turned us on to them.
Okay.
That didn't even carry him, just thought that the guy made great beer. We do research. We don't chase. Like if we call a brewery and we email them and say that we're interested in carrying their beer, and they say they don't have enough, like that's where the conversation ends. We're not going to go and keep calling them and calling them and calling them. There is a ton of great beer out there on the marketplace. A ton.
So how does somebody get in touch with someone like yourself, Greg, or Marc, or Jonny? If you guys don't chase, how do brewers get on tap?
Pick up the phone, give us a call. I mean, I get a lot of phone calls and meet with a lot of breweries. I'm willing to meet with anybody, big to small to anybody. It's definitely available.
I mean, for us, I think we're a little bit different than both these gentlemen's concepts and the fact that our local taverns have a lot of autonomy in terms of what they get to put on draft. So get breweries ask me all the time, how can we sell more beer with you? It's about building that relationship locally in the taverns with those product managers who are the local beer buyers, and to build that relationship, and that's going to ultimately lead to more beer on tap for you.
Marc, I wanted to ask you mentioned that the world of beer concept has evolved over the last few years, and it started out as just beer, it started adding food, wine, spirits. What was it about the early concept that didn't work, that forced you guys to evolve to what you are today? And what have you learned through that process?
I don't want to say it didn't work. I just think long-term growth of the brand, the need for a food element to keep people to add alternative occasions for them and to keep them in our taverns longer. Focusing on just craft beer, there's a threshold to how much volume you can push to somebody without having food. So I think to lengthen that occasion with the addition of our food menu was necessary for our long-term growth. And in terms of wine and spirits, initially just added as a veto vote. We understand that not every consumer coming with that beer consumer is going to drink beer. Now, ultimately, our goal is to try and get them into the beer segment because that's where we win.
Right.
So to have those menus, those cocktail and wine menus in place to appeal to those folks was necessary.
And we talked a little bit about the fact that beer has lost share to wine and spirits, about 10% market share over the last 20 or so years. What are wine and spirits companies doing more effectively or better than brewers right now? And what's something that breweries can learn from them so that they can start taking some of that share back, in your guys' opinions?
It's honestly a great question. I don't have a strong answer either way, because if you look at the beers that are out there, the quality of the beers, the various styles that are, nobody had Goza beers on the marketplace 5-6 years ago for the most part. I think craft beer is doing just about everything it can do to make sure that they're maintaining their marketplace strategy. I think the only thing that might be challenging is that the pricing that we're seeing now is just really increased over the last specifically 5 years, which in turn I don't mind. I think Yard House doesn't mind eating some of that, but a lot of that we have to turn over to our guests as well. And so the price point of what a high-end IPA is going to cost is now getting very, very close to where that crafted cocktail might be. And so at some point, I think people are just choosing, if it's going to be an $8 cocktail or an $8 beer, I'm just going to take the drink. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge right now is great quality at some sort of affordable price points.
That is a really good question. I don't have an answer for it. I think the thing I'd say is that I find more and more that if you look at like the baby boomer generation, is that they're a beer drinker or they're a liquor drinker, and I don't see that. I don't really see that anymore with the younger generation. It's kind of all over the place. Flavor of the month, what's the occasion and what's the experience for them.
Yeah. Marc, anything stick out to you?
I think it comes back to that quality discussion. I think it comes back to our staff training conversation. Not that we want to put somebody into the beer category that just doesn't want to be there, but if they're open to it, I know we've heard a lot about millennials being very fluid in their consumption in terms of they can have go across all segments in one occasion. So to drive them into the beer segment is, we need to have the proper training in place to educate them on the right styles that fit their taste. I think there's at times an easy notion to send them to a certain category that just doesn't make sense. Like using sours as a growing trend to get wine and spirits drinkers into the beer category, I think is a much easier thing to do than using just, typically you just go to the, light, crisp, types of styles. So just educating our staff to, how to manage that and get them into the segment.
That's a great point. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I know we're just about out of time, but I did want to take a couple audience questions that we received, because we have a bunch. So you talked about beer styles. Just real quickly down the line, what do you guys see as sort of the next big thing in craft beer in terms of style?
Jonny, you want to take that one?
Oh man, if I knew the answer to this question, I would have a different job. I think the IPAs are going to continue to see that, and I think we'll continue to see the flavor variants of IPAs be very popular. I also have to say, I think you're going to see a trend towards imported craft beer.
I'll just add, I think that instead of just pointing out one style that, is going to be the next big thing, I would say that authenticity is extraordinarily important, especially right now. So if you're a brewery that operates out of, St. Louis Park, Minnesota, and you're making a Pog Juice flavored IPA, then you're doing it wrong. You need to be true to who you are.
Right.
And you can work within, ideate and do new things, just don't go so far off of who you are, to Dan's point earlier.
Yeah, make sure the innovation matches with whatever
Correct.
the brand identity is.
Absolutely.
Sure. Marc, next big thing in craft?
I guess I'll just add on to that. I do think the increased trend back to sessionable styles, and I think that includes, in addition to pale lagers, pilsners, golden ales, it includes the sours. So you still get that, that lower ABV, so you can extend your, drinking time in our taverns, but you still get those really bold, unique, creative flavors out of those styles. So.
Awesome. Well, we have a lot of questions. We can't get to them all, but if you have questions for these guys, find them at the break, pick their brains. There's some good ones in here, so I hope you guys do. And thank you guys for joining me. Cheers.
Hey, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Big round of applause.